Hello and welcome back to the Bedside Murmurs podcast, a podcast where we chat with clinicians about their careers, pathways in medicine, clinical tips, and much more. We're very excited to bring you today's episode from the fantastic Canon Studios in Macquarie Park. If you have any questions or ideas for guests you would like to see on the show, you can direct message us on Instagram at Bedside Murmurs. I'm Sean.
And I'm Emily. Today we have the pleasure of hosting Professor Jill Klein, who is a professorial fellow in medical education at Melbourne Medical School and is a professor of marketing at Melbourne Business School. Professor Klein received her PhD in social psychology from the University of Michigan and later joined Melbourne Business School and Medical School. Professor Klein teaches clinical decision-making, leadership and resilience. Her research interests are medical decision-making, diagnostic error and medical student well-being. She has published widely, including in the British Medical Journal, Medical Education, Management Science and Harvard Business Review. She is currently co-authoring a book about thriving in medical school. So welcome, Professor Klein, to Bedside Murmurs. It's lovely to have you here today.
Thanks so much for including me. I appreciate it.
We want to start with an excerpt from your paper, Cognitive Dissonance, How Self-Protective Distortions Can Undermine Clinical Judgments, written by yourself and Professor Jeff McCall, who works as an emeritus professor and was a previous executive dean of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Queensland. Imagine a student who thinks he did very well in his first year examinations but receives a poor score. Consider an intern who was praised by a reputable specialist during morning rounds for making an excellent diagnosis, but then views the results of a scan indicating that the diagnosis is incorrect. Think of a surgeon who reads a new study suggesting that surgical procedures she often performs has been found to be not as beneficial for patient outcomes.
And so these are very real scenarios, and some of our listeners might have experienced some of these. What is cognitive dissonance and why is it important in medicine?
Okay, that's great. It's a really good question, and I think cognitive dissonance is actually central in life in general, and so it also very relevant in medicine. But basically, cognitive dissonance is the discomfort we feel when things kind of don't line up in our mind, right? So I might believe something and then learn that I was wrong. Maybe I engaged in a behavior and then realized it was counter to my values. Or like the examples you have, I thought I'd do well in an exam, didn't do that well, I misdiagnosed a patient, these sorts of things. They can all lead to cognitive dissonance. And we know that cognitive dissonance is sort of an emotional distress, and it can range anywhere from just, a mild kind of feeling to something that's really agonizing, depending on how big of a deal the situation is. But when things don't line up, we get this emotional distress. A lot of times it's unconscious. I mean, we can be very consciously upset about something and everything, but what we're not that conscious of is that we automatically jump into trying to reduce the dissonance. Because it's uncomfortable, even if it's only a tiny bit uncomfortable, I'm going to look for reasons why actually everything lines up. And I don't do this consciously. So, for example, with the exam where I didn't perform as well as I had anticipated, one thing I can do is decide, well, the professor wrote a really crap exam, or my study group led me astray. You might not say these things out loud to your friends, right? And you probably shouldn't. But my study group led me astray, and I focused on the wrong things. So one way that we can protect ourselves from and get that bad feeling to go away is to self-justify. So think about why actually what I did was okay, or what I believe is right. And, an extreme of that we're seeing today in the world of politics in the US, but also here, is the whole fake news idea, right? That if you see something on the news that doesn't fit with how you see the world, you can just avoid cognitive dissonance altogether just by it's fake news. So we do a lot of thinking about the things that are happening to us, thinking about the things we believe, thinking about the things that we learn, and we try and do that in a way that'll keep us feeling good about ourselves.
There's another fantastic quote from your paper, which is that the crux of dissonance is the threat to the sense of oneself as a good and competent person. We will defend mightily against the threat to identity by performing all sorts of mental gymnastics to avoid or reduce dissonance and to protect our own self-esteem.
Yes, I think this is the key, is that at the heart of it is the desire to protect our sense of selves, our ego, our self-esteem, our identity. So if I see myself, or I'm always at least trying to be, a very competent, intelligent person, and then I have a setback, or I have a failure, or I make a mistake, that's likely to be a threat to my identity. And I will protect against that, right? We'll protect our sense of ourself. And so I'll go through all kinds of cognitive gymnastics of self-justification and distortion to convince myself that actually I'm right, or the reason that this thing happened was something beyond my control. And that keeps us from learning, right? We can be so busy in self-protection that we're not listening to what other people have to say. We're not learning. We're not taking in new information. And so much of medicine is teamwork. And if you can't listen to the other people on your team, you know, that's a real problem. That's not good for patients.
Yeah. And I think from what we experience in medical school as well, a lot of the time there is like a correct answer for what we want to do in like our Viva examinations and our multiple choice. Oh, the thing is, all of medical school, a lot of it is multiple choice exams where there is a correct answer, and your goal is to get to the correct answer using your knowledge, multiple skills, and what you have. And it feels like if the correct answer that we've been learnt and taught is somehow wrong or challenged, it can be like a very big like attack on what we believe to be the correct like panoply of knowledge that we're supposed to have.
Yeah, exactly. That comes across as a real, or feels like a real threat to our sense of self. Yeah, I mean, part of the issue is that in the real world, things change, right? State-of-the-art knowledge changes. In fact, I just learned a couple of days ago that one of the early, this is back in the 50s, one of the first studies on cognitive dissonance had something wrong with it. So that created cognitive dissonance because I teach cognitive dissonance and I wrote a paper about cognitive dissonance. And, you know, so my first thought was to think about why that study actually was fine, even though it wasn't perfect, right? That was sort of the first thing I did. And then I was like, you know, no, it sounds like there were some real problems with that study. Now, I will say, and I don't think this is just dissonance repair, but there have been hundreds and hundreds of studies since that were far more controlled and control groups and all
And
of that
robust,
sort of
yeah.
stuff that show the same phenomenon, flu. You know? But, you know, if you're a doctor and you've been engaging in a technique or a treatment or something like that, and then you learn that it's not a good one or it's not state of the art, that can be a real blow. So in our paper on cognitive dissonance, Jeff McCall talked about arthroscopic knee surgery because it's something that he's done a lot of research on. He's done research on how people reacted to learning that the research says it's not worth doing it, right? And that doesn't mean that there isn't a patient out there that hasn't benefited because there's of course diversity across patients and things, so it helps some people, didn't help others, but on average there are probably other courses of action better than the sort of, you guys would know the technical terms, but sort of the cartilage cleanup, the pushing fluid through the knee kinds of arthroscopic surgery. It really looks like it's not a procedure that really should be done in general terms. So imagine if you're a surgeon who's been doing that procedure for years, right? And then that first study comes out. What do you think happens when you see that first study?
That can't be right.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for so many years. From my experience, it has to be correct.
Yes, and in your memory are all these patients who got better. And what you may not realize is the patients who didn't get better, at the time you might have attributed that to they're not doing their physical therapy or they're not being compliant or whatever. So you might not realize that your database of your past patients might have some bias to it. But yeah, anytime there's new research, I mean, in this case, it was, well, those are average surgeons. I'm a better than average surgeon. And
Which
so,
can't be true for more than half the surgeons.
yes, right. So and for some of them, that might be true. But, and so, well, I'm a much better surgeon, or that patient group, the patients that were in that sample, they're not the people that I work on. And, you could think of lots of reasons. But then the second big study comes out, and these are big studies. The third study, fourth study comes out, and it becomes harder and harder to explain it away. But that surgery hasn't disappeared. And again, I'm not a clinician, so there may be very good reasons why for some particular types of patients, it's good that it hasn't disappeared. But generally, the way it had been used in the past, there's much less of that being done. That's probably a good thing. But, I don't think any surgeon woke up in the morning and thought, I know this technique, this surgery doesn't really help people, but I want that boat. or I've got school fees to pay or whatever. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep doing that procedure. I don't think that's how it works at all. Most of the time what happens is you just think of a reason why it's okay. And we're very motivated to think of a reason why what we're already doing and what's good for us and we see as good for our patients, why that's okay. So there would be a strong motivation for that surgeon to think of reasons why that research is irrelevant or poorly conducted, doesn't apply to him or her, and it's okay to continue on. And so we end up just not being very agile. And it's one of the reasons I think why change is often a bit too slow in medicine is some of it's just, getting from research that shows something to our practice. There's a long chain of things you have to go through. But I think there's also the psychological pushback that being told that something that you're doing is suboptimal, particularly when you're in this career because you want to take care of patients, could really cause cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
And also, I was going to add, on top of that as well, you have to think about, especially from a surgeon's perspective, like when you're trained to be a hammer, everything kind of looks like a nail.
Yes.
But also, like when you see something, especially in the case of like arthroscopic surgery, you look at it and you go like, this is something that's wrong. We have the means to fix it. And it seems like, oh, we're going to be doing harm to the patients if we don't do anything about it. So the sample set for the alternative treatment might be super low as well. And that process is like, look, when we did research, like we know it's a process of like, we have to collect enough of a data set to kind of be convinced that this is the case.
But who wants to be offered no surgery from a surgeon? Not really many people.
That's right. I mean, the physios in the background are cheering.
Yes.
Right? They're like, yes, just do the exercises. You'll be fine. But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And what do you think are some strategies that doctors and students who are going to become doctors should be employing? Because cognitive dissonance, as you said, is a real thing and it's not something that we should be pretending doesn't exist.
Yeah. And I think since a lot of your audience are medical students or soon to be medical students, junior doctors, let's just talk about that for just a little bit and then we'll talk about what some of the ways to mitigate it are. But so you're a medical student, you're doing some clinical work, you think you have reasonable emotional intelligence skills, and you go to have a chat with family members of a patient, and it just goes pear-shaped, right? Someone gets really upset with you, they get frustrated, they're scared, they're worried, right? And so things just kind of blow up, right? But you have this sense of yourself as someone who's good at this. I mean, and you might recognize I still have a lot to learn, but you might think, this is a key strength of mine. And maybe you even have evidence from the past that you've done it really well, but now this one blows up, right? That's going to create cognitive dissonance. So you're going to feel this, and again, not necessarily consciously, but there's going to be a threat to your self-esteem as having this thing as a strength, as being good with your interpersonal skills and in difficult social situations. And that thing that's just happened is now going to be a blow to that. And so what you're likely to do is think about reasons why it wasn't really you. It was the patient's family was just completely unreasonable, or someone said something to them earlier that set up expectations that I now had to break. So there's something about the situation that made it nearly impossible for me to have done this, done this well. And so, there are a lot of ways, again, where we can self-justify, and keep our identity intact. We can walk out of that situation with, yeah, it wasn't me. But then again, we're not learning, right? So we're missing an opportunity to learn. And I think the other place for medical students, junior doctors, is, when we get any kind of negative feedback, we come into programs really quite perfectionistic.
Yeah.
What's
Yes.
that?
I was going to say optimistic.
Yeah, optimistic. Also, kind of perfectionistic. A lot of the things that got us into medical school helped us get in are, doing things really super well almost all of the time, right? And then you get to the point where you're doing clinical work, and like you were saying before, that this notion that there's one right answer, right? When you do clinical work, there's all this uncertainty. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and it's way more complex, and there's other people involved and things like that. And so it doesn't work like taking an exam. It's a different set of skills, and there's a tough transition period as you go from the book work into the clinical work, where I think dealing with that uncertainty and your perfectionism, that they often can kind of clash and lead to a lot of cognitive dissonance. I thought I was smart. I thought I would get this, but I'm confused here. I'm uncertain. It's unclear what's going on. Why can't I see it? And that might all feel like a threat to yourself.
This is going to come very from left field, but the biggest difference, I think, from like clinicians to AI is that when you talk to a clinician and bring them data, they go like, oh, it could be this. We have a list of differential diagnoses and things like that. Whereas AI will tell you that it is this. And I've seen this like a lot of times, like family members or like people that I talk to, they go like, the AI said that this is what it is. And I was like, what information did you give it? And it's like, oh, I just gave it like all this stuff. And then it just had like such a certain, but where does that certainty come from? It like from our perspective, we go like, oh, it could be like any one of like 8 things.
Yes.
But the AI is so sure.
Which does not align with clinical practice at all, because even on the wards a few weeks ago, we had a patient who presented with what we thought was one particular type of seizure, and then found out quite some time later it was a completely different cause. And so if we'd put that into an AI model, it probably would have guessed what we all initially thought, which was a very seemingly obvious diagnosis.
Yes.
But then the treatment completely changed 3 days ago because of some nuanced questions asked by a particular treating team. And so it seems to miss that nuance. It's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But the nuance really only comes if you let down your guard, I guess, for cognitive dissonance, and you allow yourself to be wrong.
Yes, that's exactly right. And, I think it's even stronger with AI, but for a long time, patients have been Googling stuff, and they put in a couple of symptoms, and they'll find one article that's the scariest.
And it'll just assert it.
And then print it out, bring to the doctor's office, this is what I have.
That's right.
Diagnose me, please.
And if you tell them they're wrong, that's going to create dissonance on their part, right? So,
But also the sad thing is sometimes you have to go like, you're wrong, but we don't know what it is as well.
Yes.
Because they come here searching for answers, and the process of medicine is slowly trying to get to what works to abate symptoms, what works to make sure that you have the best quality of life.
Yes.
That kind of nuance isn't quite baked into AI as of now. And
Not at all.
Which makes perfect sense why AI is so great at taking medical school exams. But
I'd love
horrible.
to see it try an OSCE.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which is, but the thing is, right, even the OSCE marking criteria is like I'm sure they'll do good in OSCEs in terms of like marking.
Because it's all very structured. Yeah.
But maybe when we actually do take a step back and we look a little bit further across, how often in clinical cases does it actually make a diagnosis that works best in the best interest of the patient? I think that's probably where the biggest gap right now is in clinical AI.
Yeah. But look, I love the way both of you are phrasing this and talking about this, because you're talking about differential diagnosis and that potential to be 3 or 4 or 8 different things you don't know yet. There's more that you have to do, because I think this is a fairly recent change, and it also suggests you're getting some very good education. Some great people are teaching you.
Good job, you and you.
Because a lot of times I think medical students, when they're on the wards and you do rounds and the chief doctor, the consultant is there, and then you're in the hallway and they're like, well, so what's going on, right? You can feel like to show that you're really super smart, you have to have one thing and it has to be the right thing, because that's what works on exams, right? But really, the best way to talk about what might be going on with the patient is a set of possibilities, differential diagnoses, and then what might be next steps to find out what's going on. And it's interesting because I was talking to fourth-year students at University of Melbourne, which means that's their last, because they do undergrad first and then go to med school, so that's their last year. And we were talking about overconfidence bias, and I was saying a remedy to overconfidence bias, if you have some power, you're kind of in charge, is don't expect precise and 100% confident answers or opinions from somebody in a situation where there's no way to be certain, right? Because that just creates this elaborate theater that we play where we feel like, well, we have to be experts, we have to know it all, and so we walk around faking it till we make it and pretending to know it all, and that leads to mistakes in the business world, in any kind of organization, and in medicine. And so I was teaching this to the students, and they said, well, the problem is it's pretty clear to us that the senior doctors want us to have one diagnosis. They want us to have they want us to be really decisive and have one diagnosis. So then a couple of weeks later, I was talking to a bunch of senior doctors, and I told them this story. I said, here's what the fourth years, told me. And I said, but if someone said, well, look, I think it could be one of these three things. I think the thing we need to rule out the quickest, because it could be potentially the most dangerous, is this, and I would suggest that we do this to rule that out, and then we could look at this and this. I said, if a student were to say that to you, would that be better or worse than having one diagnosis that they were sure of? And they were like, no, the multiple potential diagnoses, way better. Oh my God, it shows, much more complex thinking, much more realistic thinking. Oh, we love it, we love it. So I went back to the fourth year students. I said, the senior doctors said, they want the complexity, the differential stuff. And they said to me, that's what they tell you, but it's not the message we get really strongly. So I think that there have been, and probably still are, some issues in medical education around medical students still trying to do what they did on exams, which is find the right answer. And sometimes senior people kind of rewarding that because you're so clear, you're so concise. But we know from a diagnostic excellence perspective that having differential diagnoses is a good idea. And one thing that really helps lead to incorrect diagnoses is jumping to an initial diagnosis too quickly, because then we tend to look for things that confirm that diagnosis, and we end up on a set of tracks that we might not ever leave again.
Oh, this is a very big problem. Especially people that have like very strange common symptoms that all like kind of align together. They have this problem where they get hit with a diagnosis and it kind of just follows them throughout the clinical course. And then they go anywhere and they're like, oh, this person has Guillain-Barré syndrome. This is why XYZ is happening. Or it's always like this. And then it's like, there could be a lot of causes of a certain thing. I will say, I think there is in medicine a tendency for there to be two types of questions that senior clinicians like to ask. One type, which is like, bone, what is this bone? Where there is a correct answer.
Right.
And there's like this is the thing, right? Whereas there's some questions that allow for a lot more, like, I guess, nuance and thought process.
And complexity and judgment.
And I think, actually, I only really learned this through my surgical term. We think we know a lot of stuff. And then we go into theaters and then we open someone up and then it's like, oh, by the way, this is the second renal artery. And we're like, what? So this person just has two,
So just all the variability in human beings.
Actually, and again, we were pulling out like this thing. We were like trying to figure out, identify what this is, and we're like, oh, like isn't this like normal? And I was like, no, the tumor made this artery. Like it was huge. It was almost the size of the own renal artery next
Wow.
to it. And then
Wow.
you're like, sometimes you stop and just question and you're like, what is going on? And I think this more senior staff, they tend to like medical students kind of giving a little bit more like nuance. It's like, oh, what other things in this area could it be?
Yes.
Where like things to consider, where because especially the functional anatomy changes person to person all the time, and yeah,
Yeah.
I have seen a shift slowly across the years where they're more likely to accept a nuanced answer like that.
Yeah, which is good, and I think some of that may be their education as we learn more and more about diagnostic error and what contributes to it, and this notion of just wait a few seconds, wait a little while. When I teach this stuff, I talk about this wonderful book that's called How Doctors Think, and it's about how cognitive biases can affect healthcare workers' decisions. And they interview an emergency doctor, and he tells a story, says, he came into work one day and someone stopped him and said, that patient you saw yesterday, which is the last thing you ever want to hear as an emergency doctor. In fact, I wrote a paper with an emergency doctor, Julia Harrison, on coping with error in medicine. That's called "Remember That Patient You Saw." So it's just something you don't want to hear. And so he said, as soon as someone asked him that, he like froze. And it turned out he had missed something, and there was a real consequence for that patient. They had to be brought back in and readmitted, and they had gotten worse. And so it was really concerning. And he said that what he learned from that was just to always just hold back just a little bit, no matter how obvious something appears to be. And in emergency rooms, departments, you don't have that much time to think about things a lot. If someone's in resus, you got to move quickly. But he said most of the time you got half a minute where you can think, if it's not this, what else could it be? What symptoms don't fit with what I think it is? And one thing that I tell students is, if you start to tell yourself, well, maybe it's just an atypical symptom, that's a red light of warning that you might be trying too hard to make things fit.
This is true.
And confirm your initial diagnosis as opposed to being open. So our brains will easily look for why we're right or why something fits with what we already think. But we have to push our brain. It doesn't take long, but we have to test the other side of the coin. What would show me that I'm wrong? What doesn't fit? If it wasn't what I think it is, what else could it be? It's kind of pushing towards that differential diagnosis.
I think, though, it also comes with the nuances that you gain in being on the wards. I think Sean and I have really only got that perspective this year once we've been reintroduced to actual clinical medicine,
work,
because beforehand, even though we had tastes of that, it still very much felt like almost like a flashcard, like question, answer, question, answer. There's a definitive answer for every question. But then the moment you step onto an actual clinical ward, you realize definitive answers are actually very hard to come by. Textbook presentations are very hard to come by.
Super rare.
And I think that's why a lot of medical students find that transition really hard. I mean, there's a lot going on. You're dealing with real people. You're dealing with people grieving, upset, scared. You're dealing with loss. You're dealing with seeing somebody die. There's a lot going on already. But it is this massive step into uncertainty. And when your identity has been very much built up around having the right answer and doing that more often than everybody else, and then suddenly there's a whole new way. I mean, all those facts that you have, they're helpful, but your reasoning and your cognition needs to take a very different approach. And I think that can be a real threat to identity, that you've been very good at something for so long, and then you go through this shift. It's also something that I talk to our med students about, is the shift coming into medical school. If you don't mind me shifting to that.
Yes, that would be fantastic to chat about.
But so when I first started working with students at Melbourne Medical School, I joined near the end of the year. So literally the last day of medical school, I did a session on dissonance, growth mindset, and resilience. And at the end of it, 4 students came up to me in tears and hugged me, which was like incredibly sweet. But one of the things they said is, no one's talked to us about this, but where were you when we started medical school? Where were you 4 years ago? Because that's when I was dealing with a big identity crisis, right? And so now I'm with them the second day of induction week, of orientation week. I'm there teaching them about this stuff. And one of the things I say to them is that, where you came from, because for ours it's undergraduate degrees. For your program it would be in high school, right? The variance is like this, right? I mean, it's like, it's huge, right? We skim off the top to pick our students for medical school. So now the variance is like this, right? How much of your identity do you want wrapped around where you are on this distribution, right? And then I would also say, but some of my colleagues might not like me saying it, but I'll say it here. Half of that's measurement error. Because our exams, our assessments, they're really good, but they're not perfect. Nothing is, right? So some of that's measurement error. So, how much of your identity do you really want wrapped around this? And I had talked to the third year students and I said to them, you're still here. You were top of class and then you came here, and, how is it going? How did you manage that? And this one young woman raised her hand and said, well, fortunately for me, I stayed top of class. And I thought, well, that's interesting that she said that out loud, but good for her, that's great. But the guy sitting next to her said, well, for the rest of us, we had to recalibrate. And I said, okay, tell me about that recalibration so I can tell the first year students. And I said, yeah, our identity for so many years has been around being top of the class or really near the top of the class. That's who we are. That's how everyone sees us. That's how we see ourselves. And then you just can't be that once you come in. It's just unrealistic. And so your identity shifts from that to being in the class, right? Getting through the exams. And they said, look, exams are going to matter for us for a really long time. I mean, for years to come, they'll really matter to us. But trying to get the best score in the exam is no longer something we're trying for. It's, you want to do well in the exams. You want to get through the exams. You want to make sure you learn the stuff that's in the exams so that you can do well by your patients. But your identity isn't about being, top of the curve. But they told me that process, that recalibrating their identity from I'm the top of class person, took them months and was really painful. And, one of the things we talk about is like they get a quiz that's worth 2% of their grade in one class. That's their first quiz, right? So it means nothing and everything at the same time, right? Because everybody's like benchmarking and where am I? And it's the first, piece of data. And, I see kids coming out of this quiz, this tiny little quiz, and some of them are just... There's no blood in their face. They're just petrified. And it's kind of like you've taken out the core of their identity and shredded it right in front of them, because this who they've been for so long is not who they are right now, or at least it isn't who they are in every performance that they give. And so that's a tough thing to get around. So now I'm with them on that second day, and I say, so let's start recalibrating right now, because
that's a great place to insert.
Here's where your identity's gonna be, but the third year say was a months-long process. It doesn't need to be. Let's just get started early, and they all laugh. And I joke with them and I say, look, I know you're all worried that you're the admissions error. And they all laugh, and you can see just people relax, because they're all thinking that everyone seems so much smarter than them and everything, but everybody's feeling that. And then I always joke, I say, well, there's probably 2 or 3 of you who think the school is super lucky to have you in the program. But the rest of you are worried that it's an admissions error. And, and I think a lot of students come in just thinking, this is a huge step up. How am I going to do this? Will I be top like I've always been? Could I flunk? Could I, people, and how will I just manage it all and still have some kind of life outside? So I think that's a big weight on new medical students.
And I think for, at least from our medical school, it's direct entry from high school. A lot of people who come into medical school, if they fail a test, it will be the first test they've ever failed in their life. If they do badly in a test, it would be the first test they've done badly in. There's genuinely people in our medical school where they get like a mid-70s mark and it would be the worst mark
Oh, yeah.
they have ever seen
It's like a failure, massive
like,
failure. Yes,
in their
yes.
entire life. Whereas in our school, that's like insanely high mark. I think it was a really good idea from the medical students' perspective and also medical school's perspective to like make it kind of a little bit randomized almost. They took away all of the, the marking in terms of like ranking.
Yes.
They make all like the clinician placements and things like that just randomized.
That's great.
They make it like very difficult for you to use marks as a leverage to kind of like, move like into different places.
Yes.
And it just means that a lot of us are way more supportive. In USW, I actually do see the change, like when we...
Good culture
Yeah.
in
Yes.
terms of supporting each other and not hogging resources and being willing to share because you're all in it together. And you'll all be
Exactly.
randomized to a hospital at the end of the day. So it's not like you're gunning for a spot.
Yeah.
I think
know
that's
different
really
in
important.
Victoria, though.
In Victoria, there's,
Yeah.
competing for the spots. I think that's really unfortunate for a number of reasons because of what it gets in the way of in terms of, I think our students are still quite cooperative because they want to help each other and they're together, but it still creates this
Tension,
competition, this feeling like I have to get better marks than other people. It's also from a selection perspective silly because again, this is the distribution, right? So they're going to do these interviews, they're going to do all of this stuff because people sort of have the delusion that we're good at predicting what people are going to be like through interviews or through other criteria. And that's actually something we're pretty overconfident about. So I think a lot of times, I think the reason why it might still exist in some places like Victoria is just this feeling like we'll get better people if I'm involved in picking them. And that's actually probably not true. In many cases, just not true because we're terrible at getting a small sample of somebody's behavior, seeing their grades, and then deciding who they're going to be as they go through this really transformative year of internship and stuff like that. So if they took the time and effort that they place into selection, let it just be random, took that time and effort into onboarding,
Yes.
into induction, into orientation, oh God, it would be so much better because then everyone who comes in would be brought a big step
Yes.
up, and it would be so much better for everyone. I really think that. But I love the way you articulated that you don't have to compete for these
No.
spots, and that's really, really important. I think, though, when you have people who've been top of class, like most of their lives or all their lives, I still think, like, we don't do grades in the first year at Melbourne
Okay.
Medical School, which I think helps. But I think people are still...
They
comparing.
want that. They
You're,
want
you're
that.
still kind of comparing. And look, they still have to know, what do they seem to understand and what do they not seem to understand. So you still have to be, aware of where your weaknesses are. And sometimes that has to be a little bit in terms of other people. Are you struggling with something that's just really hard and everyone's struggling with it? Because that means something different from, no, most people have got this, but I'm struggling with this. And that would suggest a different strategy. Like it might tell me, okay, I need to put more time and effort. I need to get some help and coaching. So the feedback, I hope we don't do away with the feedback because I think that's really important for learning. But I think we can bring people in to understand that we all have strengths and weaknesses, and we're not doing medical students any favor if we don't talk about their weaknesses, right? But if hearing about a weakness creates cognitive dissonance for you, which it does for most of us, and you defend against that feedback, then an opportunity for learning is lost.
It's like advice hyper responders, where you kind of accept and take in the advice that you resonate most with. And sometimes that's good. And sometimes it pushes you down a path that just it goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, where you're like, you need to perform better, you need to perform better, you need to perform better.
Yeah.
And that gets into the way of like learning. And I think there's people that might in medical school might have like, I finished like getting into medical school and now I'm like just gonna blob out for the rest of the career. And sometimes what they need is like, oh, this is like a really important test. You should like properly study for it. Like you will be an unsafe doctor. Sometimes
right.
sometimes
Yes.
that's necessary. But for the majority of the time, most medical students have the aptitude where because you're picking those people,
Yes.
you've already got like the drive. You have it. what they might need to hear more is that that's not the only thing that's important.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what they need is, and the thing is, right, if you're super dedicated to studying and like, you go to hospital and then you go home and then you study and then you sleep and you
Yeah.
go to hospital and go home and go, and
Yeah.
it's like, that's your entire day, every day, 5 days a week. And then in the weekends, you have full days of study.
Right.
That gets in the way of you becoming an actual doctor and being a
Yes.
great doctor.
For sure.
Because you don't have the life experience, you don't have the ability to kind of interact in positions outside of hospital. You just
Yeah.
don't know how like the real world works.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if like, and this is like a common complaint of patients where they go like, the doctor just told me to do something that's utterly insane, which is like, oh, you need to just do this physiotherapy and then you do this. And then like, I have a job. I have a,
Yes. Yeah. So you
Is
don't
this
have
something
the
that, like,
real
yeah.
world kind of
yeah.
background in
Yeah.
a sense because they're not experiencing life. And yeah, and look, there are a lot of reasons why that sort of routine that you talked about is bad for you. One is usually people who are doing that are not getting enough sleep. And we know that sleep is when we consolidate our memories. So we're much more likely to remember what we learned today, tomorrow, if we get a full night's sleep. So a lot of medical students, say, I'll study for an extra hour and get an hour less sleep. And that's actually counterproductive. And same thing with exercise or even just moving around, going for a walk, eating reasonably nutritious food instead of just junk food all the time. Taking the time to make those things happen pays off in dividends. In terms of your learning and cognitive capacity and memory, right, which you really need right now, but also in terms of your emotional well-being and your physical well-being, which are really important. Because, you could do what that person's doing, but there's a few things that are likely to happen. One is, burnout. It's a long time. And then they're going to get to fellowship and there's exams. And I mean, it isn't like you get out of med school and then everything
done, yeah.
stops. It's still, you're just kind of a third of the way through or I make everybody sad. Maybe more like half of the way through if you're going to have a specialty and do a fellowship and stuff like that. So it's, you have to have a pattern and a routine that's sustainable. And then the other thing that happens, and I saw this working with executives of businesses, because I've spent most of my career as a business school professor, and we do executive education, and then we have dinner with them and stuff like that. So I hang out with executives a lot. And one of the things that I see a lot is that the ones who worked really hard because they thought maybe they'd be CEO, right? They would become, get to the top of the thing. And most people don't. Like you might get to the leadership team or something like that, but most people don't make CEO. And even if they do, it's not as rewarding as they think. It's cool, but it's not as rewarding necessarily as they think. And I've had so many conversations with executives whose children are now teenagers, so they're in their 40s, coming into their 50s, where you're really starting to see where am I going to peak in my career, right? And they say to me, I've missed it. My kids have moved away. We're empty nest. I missed it. I was working so hard, and even when you're spending lots of time with your kids, I can tell you, boom, it goes by like that. It goes by so quickly. But the sadness that so many of these people had who had been really high achievers in their work, and even if they had achieved everything they wanted, they get to a certain point of life where saying, I shouldn't have put every egg into one basket. There was so much of life that I missed. And I really try and get that across to medical students. Keep living your life. It's the best thing for your learning. It's the best thing for your mental health and physical health. Research consistently shows that your social relationships and the social support that you have around you is absolutely essential for everyday well-being, but also for when there's adversity. So if something really bad happens, one of the key predictors of how resilient you can be and how well you can respond to that adversity is, do you have some social support? You don't need 100 people social network, right? It doesn't need to be huge. I know as students we have lots of friends and stuff. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But it can also be a core group of small group of friends, but they're going to be there for you. But it's absolutely essential. And if you don't spend time building that, you're going to be at a disadvantage in a lot of ways. And research with old people and happiness in old people shows that, having a steady relationship and healthy relationship is the biggest predictor of their happiness. So we don't want to give up our relationships. That's too big of a price to pay. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot to medical students at the University of Melbourne.
Yes.
But it sounds like you're willing to expand your plethora of knowledge to other medical students as well. And you're co-authoring a book. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I'm co-authoring a book called Thriving in Medical School. So it's a well-being book for med students. And my co-author is a wonderful young psychiatrist still in training. She's in New York, Jordan Feingold. And she's doing her residency in psychiatry. And so I'm writing the first half of the book, which is basically sort of life 101, things about psychology it's good to know. So there's resilience things and well-being things and stuff like that. But there's also how do you form impressions of other people and how do they form impressions of you? Sort of just some basic stuff that's really helpful to know about how life works. And in that is some, how does stereotype bias work? How might stereotypes of your patients or of each other, your colleagues, affect how you treat them and things? So just important things to know in life that as social psychologists, we spend a lot of time studying. So there's some chapters like that. And then Jordan, because she's the clinician, she's writing the chapters like how to learn on the wards. You've experienced your first death. What are some coping strategies? So we wouldn't in the book be saying, how do you manage a difficult conversation with a family? But the book would address, okay, it's gone really well. How do you celebrate that? Or it's gone not the way you wanted. How do you cope with that? How do you work forward to the next step? So it's not training. It is training, but not clinical training. It's this piece of clinical training that we usually don't have, which is, okay, in real life, there are good days and bad days. You're in a high-stakes environment. You will make mistakes. There's a lot that we need to cope with and learn to enjoy. And so that's sort of where the book is coming from. And it's very positive psychology. So there's surviving medical school books all over the place. We called it Thriving in Medical School for a reason, because it's an amazing time of your life. It's these wonderful years. It's a lot of work and it's hard and it's a challenge, but it's also wonderful. And we don't want all these young people studying to do this really courageous work to spend those years worried or feeling lonely that they're experiencing something that no one else is experiencing. Like thinking, I shouldn't have gotten into this program, and not realizing that the person sitting next to them is thinking exactly the same thing. So we try and blow the lid off some of that stuff. And one of the ways that we do it is we've interviewed lots of doctors, junior doctors through senior doctors, and they give advice. And one thing that was interesting is we had, in the first few interviews, we asked about imposter syndrome because we have that in one of our chapters. So we thought, great, they can click on a clip of doctors talking about this. So then we had enough material on that, so we stopped asking it as a question. It came up in almost every doctor interview we did since then. It just comes up. And not just junior doctors, plenty of senior doctors. And so it's in fact, it's often called the imposter phenomenon because syndrome kind of medicalizes it, and it's kind of too common to be medicalized.
That's such a doctor thing to think of.
Yeah.
What is a syndrome?
Syndrome, right. So it should just be the imposter experience that we all have sometimes. And so So the nice thing about the book is you read some stuff. We're trying to keep the text as short as possible. I know about the attention spans of you guys. You're not gonna. I mean, you
surprisingly,
clearly, yes, you clearly can study and learn lots of stuff. But you like stuff in short bits and short videos and things
yield.
like that. Yeah, because we know this will be auxiliary reading. The book can be the basis of a well-being curriculum in a medical school, and we're happy to help medical schools with that, because a lot of schools on their own are developing their own well-being curriculums, but we see this as a resource that could be the basis of it. But we also just see it as what we want is for medical schools to subscribe to it, and then as soon as you get accepted, you get the password to the book. And so in that sweet time before you come to medical school and start feeling overwhelmed, you could get some of this stuff under your belt in anticipating medical school. So maybe even before you start worrying about something, we can
get to you.
we can sort of
you're
show
probably
you
most
doctors.
excited to read it
Yeah.
then, because I think by the time it's been a few years, you're a little bit more, I don't want to say disillusioned,
Yes.
but you're more busy and potentially more negatively framing your experiences.
Yes. And that's why I love teaching an induction. The second day, everyone's so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and it's really good. But yeah, so you were talking about the students I talked to. I just came back from Ghana, where I talked to healthcare students at 3 different universities. And it was absolutely fascinating, because I was talking about, one of the things we talk about is human beings are super fallible. Like, no matter how hard we try, how perfectionistic we are, our brains are fallible. We're subject to biases. We have cognitive constraints. And we will make mistakes. And so the key question is not how to never make a mistake, but how to handle it when it happens. And part of that is seeing yourself on a journey of trying to always make fewer and fewer mistakes as you learn more and more, but recognizing you'll never get to 0 mistakes, and nobody does, right? And that's part of it. And it's hard because it's a high stakes environment. So mistakes can be really consequential, but still having accurate expectations for yourself and the situation you're in, we think is really, really important. Well, in Ghana, after my first talk, a student came up to me and he said, we don't ever see our parents admit to a mistake. That they would never admit to a mistake. I said, even a mistake that's not about parenting, like would someone come home from work and say, oh, I messed this thing up at work? They said, never in front of us.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, that's really interesting. So it already is hard in Australia to talking about mistakes, that the way you create psychological safety and create more safety for patients is to talk, for senior people to talk about mistakes so that they're not covered up and people learn that this is part of the process. But when you have a culture that's particularly, just we're not raised this way. And it was really, really interesting. And so I did a lot of talking with students about that. And the main thing I think a lot of them were concerned about is if they do tell their supervisor that they made a mistake, they can get yelled at. And like really yelled at. And so the last thing they'd want to do is ever talk about a mistake. And so I had in this talk, there were 800 healthcare students in the room, but the first few rows were the faculty. And I then I'm in the sticky position because the faculty invited me there, and they're wonderful. They're amazing people, and they're amazing teachers and everything else. So I don't want to throw them under the bus, right? But somebody said, so what do we do if we admit to a mistake and we get screamed at, And I said, well, try and separate, blah, 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 blah. But, just also tried to make the case that research clearly shows that patients are much safer if we talk about mistakes. And it was lovely because the head of the school, the dean, in his closing remarks said, we're going to have to really think about doing better with how we manage your mistakes and talk to you about your mistakes. And that was just so wonderful because I'd been saying, you need senior people to role model, maybe there's a different way to do this. And he did it right there. It was beautiful. It was like one of my favorite moments of teaching ever was when he said that. So it's really interesting. I'm going to Malawi, which is like the 3rd poorest country in the world. It's incredibly poor. So I'll be going there and we'll be talking to healthcare students. And part of this is we have a US version of the book that we're we're writing and the Australian version of the book, but we'd also like to have like an English-speaking Australian version of the book and a UK version and da-da-da-da. And eventually anywhere any co-author can translate it and contextualize it for the culture and the setting that it's
Because I
in.
imagine even Australian medical school is quite different to medical school in the United States, where I've heard that medical students in the United States have a little bit more autonomy over patients and are often expected to go earlier or pre-round or write notes and actually do part of like a clinical job almost. Whereas for us, it seems like our primary purpose is to learn
Yes.
and actually documentation, etc. Unless you're really keen being at the end of your medical school training.
Right.
It's really keep that for the doctors and for the people who are registered so you don't get in trouble.
Yes, no, I think that's true, and there are just these different cultures and these different systems, and my sense is that the U.S. system is still rougher in terms of scheduling,
That's
so
what
that you don't get
I
enough
think.
sleep, bullying being allowed, and things like that. I think Australia is a step ahead, and it wasn't like this 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, the full expectation from our graduating students is they would get sent out to their internship or whatever
Just
and
figure it out.
and
Yeah.
potentially be mistreated, very likely be mistreated, right? And now, I'm not saying it's been eradicated, right? Because there'll be still hospitals or parts of hospitals where that stuff, and individuals within those places where that stuff will still happen. But one thing that senior doctors say to me so often, not even that old, like early 40s, would be, if I said to a medical student or an intern or a junior doctor the things that were said to me, I would lose my job. Or I'd at least be in super duper trouble. Like I wouldn't be able to do it a second time, right? And I love hearing that because it just shows. And 10 years ago, there was this feeling like it's never going to change. There's a hierarchy. These people have power. There's no incentive for them to change. It'll never change. And it's changed so much, partly because the incentives changed, right? You actually could get in trouble for doing that. It turns out if there's a consequence for something, you'll start controlling your behavior a little bit more.
But also, like, it leads to better patient care.
Oh,
the
yeah,
end.
for sure.
And-
We know that if you got yelled at for something and then you're worried about something that the senior doctor didn't see, are you going to raise it? No way.
And-
Right? No way.
The thing is, right, mistakes happen whether or not you admit to them or not.
Yes.
And if you just don't admit to them, the only way out of it is to either cover it up or do something else to remedy that. And if you don't have like the ability to really fix the problem, this is really common. Actually, chest trainers will learn me how to do chest
Yes.
trains. Super hilarious. And they will be like, oh, the reason why, like, it was a thoracic surgeon that was teaching us.
Right.
And
Now,
he's
you're,
like,
just so I know, you're sticking a tube into someone's
Yes.
lungs to drain fluid in the
Yes.
lungs.
Yeah.
Got it.
And he's
Okay.
basically like, okay, we do this kind of willy-nilly, but you should do it like this and just be very, very careful and always have help nearby, things like that. Because when we do it, we can fix it. If we do something wrong, we can fix it.
Right.
We have the ability to fix it. But when you do it, you might not. And
You might not be able to fix
and
it, yeah.
I'm careful when I'm doing this. So you need to, like, brace, have like safety, all of this, right?
Yes.
I think that's when he said that, I was like, oh, it actually makes so much sense. If you are in a position where you made a mistake
Right.
that is larger than your capacity to fix it,
There's a problem. Yeah.
and you can't admit to it,
Yes.
that leads to terrible patient
Oh,
outcomes.
yeah, definitely. And also, a lot of errors happen in large part because of systemic things, that two drugs that look like one another
Yeah.
are, their labels are too similar and they're kept in the same drawer. I mean, there are a lot of things like this. And if errors aren't reported, then at the hospital level,
don't know.
they can't discover, ooh, this is a dangerous point in the process. Let's get in there and redesign that so that they can help prevent these things from happening. And look, I think one reason why mistakes are so difficult to deal with is that it comes back a bit to cognitive dissonance and our identity. But if I make a mistake, then it might mean that I don't have it. So, with being top of class and then, doing really well in medical school or having struggles or not in medical school, there's still this idea that we can have, it's known as a fixed mindset. This idea that you either have it or you don't. You have a certain level of intelligence and other people have other levels of intelligence, and it's set and it's fixed. You have a certain level of manual dexterity, and sure, practice can help, but for the most part, most of it has to do with...
You just have to have it.
Yeah, you just have to have it, right? And maybe it's genetically endowed or whatever, something is you learned as a young child, but at this point as an adult, you're stuck with it, right? And you either have it or you don't. The other way to view intelligence and capabilities is that actually the adult brain is malleable. We can do things and practice things, and it actually affects our brain. And so getting good at something, it's not whether you have it or not. There's a process for getting better at anything, no matter where I'm starting. And instead of trying to diagnose, do I have this permanent and fixed ability or not? What's the process for getting good at this? That's a much healthier approach. And there's been like 60 years of research on this, on what happens when people think intelligence and abilities are fixed versus they're malleable. And when you think they're fixed, they either have it or you don't. Then when you have setbacks or face challenges, it can be very threatening to your identity. Oh my God, this might mean I don't have it, right? So that first exam or first quiz that's worth 2%, and the kids, all the blood had drained from their faces. They're walking out and sorry I say kids, I know you're adults, I'm just very, very old. But when they're coming out and their blood is just drained from their face, a lot of it is, this is evidence that maybe they don't have it. They've been told all their life they have it. And oh my God, maybe I don't. And that's where the identity threat comes from. With that growth or learning mindset, it's, you're not celebrating that you didn't do as well on the quiz as you wanted, but you recognize that, well, why would I have expected everything to go really smoothly as I went into medical school? Of course, there's going to be setbacks and difficulties. The key thing is, how do I manage this? What do I do to figure out, what don't I understand, and move forward from that, right? And so it's very different. And so 60 years of research shows with a fixed mindset, we tend to sometimes avoid challenges. Like, we don't want to put ourselves in a situation that might show us up. And if we do get shown up, it makes us feel really bad and we're really upset about it. If we fail something or have setbacks or we get negative feedback, it's just all a threat. Whereas with learning, the growth or learning mindset, it's, oh, someone's giving me feedback. Oh, it's negative feedback. Oh, positive feedback's more fun, but negative feedback's a big opportunity, right? Someone's taking some time to point out a weakness. I need to listen to this and learn and figure out what I need to do next. And maybe they can help me figure out when I can try it next and that sort of thing. So you're much more engaged in feedback. In our book, we talk about being feedback seeking. People you work with, your supervisors, are so friggin' busy that sometimes feedback just goes by the wayside, and then you get to the end of a rotation and they're trying to remember what they can about you and stuff like that, but you haven't gotten the best kind of feedback, which is right while you're doing that procedure and somebody's watching you and stuff like that. And so what you really want is, to get that feedback. And so if your faculty are doing their job and your supervisors are doing their job, you're going to get negative feedback. Do you see it as a coaching and learning opportunity, or do you see it as a threat that suggests you don't have some fixed ability? It makes a big difference in how we learn. And unfortunately, one of the ways that we get a fixed mindset is because we've grown up with fixed mindset praise. So we've been told, you're so smart, you're so intelligent, you're so special, you're so far above everybody else. We've been praised as if it's all about some fixed ability and we have it, right? Now, praising kids is really important. I was on a podcast once, a radio interview, and it got edited so that it sounded like I was saying, don't praise your children. And I got emails. So I am not saying don't praise your children. When you praise your children, praise them for what they have control over. Praise for the effort they put into something. Like if the kid comes home with a great math test, a great math score, don't say, oh, you're so smart at math. say, well, I saw you preparing for that, and I know that you asked your teacher a couple of questions about that, and that sounds like that was really helpful. So you praise the process of getting good at something, because that's all we ever really have for sure, and that we really have control over. But it helps kids develop a sense of getting good at stuff as a process, and that process includes setbacks and failures sometimes. And, what I need to do is learn the skills for managing that. When we tell our kids they're great at everything all the time and everybody gets a trophy just by showing up, we thought that would give them higher self-esteem, and it doesn't. It makes them brittle. Research is really quite clear on that. It gives them a fixed mindset because they've been getting that sort of praise. And then it may be contributing to adolescent depression, because when they get to an age where the world isn't coddling them or taking such good care of their self-esteem, in fact, the opposite starts to happen in adolescence, the kids don't have the tools to deal with it. Because, no one's ever talked to them about how on their soccer team they're one of the weakest kids, and what would they like to get better at, and how do we go talk to the coach, and, that sort of thing. That conversation, hasn't been having, because we wanted to protect them, but it was the wrong approach.
And also, wouldn't you like to know that you're bad at soccer? Like, and
that's the thing.
right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to know that you actually can't really sing?
And if I'm your patient, I want you to know, and I want you to have learned a long time ago. No, I sometimes have senior doctors say to me that they're worried about telling more junior doctors and interns, but even med students too, but they're worried about telling more junior people that they've done something wrong or could have done something better, because they'll end up in HR. They'll end up in trouble, right? We don't want that. No. We don't want bullying and people berated for not doing something perfect. That's not okay. Where the pendulum was before was not okay. But I do worry a little bit that the pendulum's gone to, that psychological safety means I should be able to go into work and never hear that I have a weakness or that I've done something wrong. And that's not psychological safety. Psychological safety is feeling comfortable with candid conversations, even disagreeing with each other, and feeling comfortable talking about mistakes. That's psychological safety. It's not someone's going to be nice to me every minute and I will never feel challenged or unhappy at work, because that is not how work works or how life works, right?
You don't want to be lying to yourself as well.
Exactly.
If the best kind of advice is, hey, you're bad at this, but this is something that you can get better at.
For sure. For sure.
Whereas the opposite, like the bullying side of the pendulum,
yes,
is like, this is something that you are intrinsically horrible at.
Oh, yeah.
And
what do you think you're doing there? And you're never getting, And one of the things I work with senior clinicians and senior executives on is how to give more growth mindset oriented feedback, right? Because you can work really hard on your growth mindset, and then someone can just like rip it away from you by just being horrible. But it can be really good feedback is very specific about the behaviors. Like when you said to that family, blah blah blah, I think it was a little bit confusing for them. And can you think of maybe a better way that you might want to phrase that in the future? That's how you do it. And then I coach you on what's the best. I find that saying this helps make it really clear and helps put them at ease. And so it's a coaching session. And so I'm not ignoring that you scared the crap out of a patient's family kind of unnecessarily, right? I'm not ignoring that happened. But the approach to it is very much more like a coaching. And also one of the things that I suggest senior people to do is to remind the person that they're giving feedback to, I see you as someone who can do this. You're just not there yet. Because that takes the fixed mindset thing kind of off the table. So if you have a really strong fixed mindset, and the thing is, I teach growth mindset. I believe in it in theory. Most of my participants believe in it in theory, right? But you're getting negative feedback, the fixed mindset thoughts are going to come out. You have a setback or a failure, the fixed mindset thoughts are going to come out. So we all are capable of, thinking, oh crap, I'm such a failure. Or I thought I was good at this and clearly I'm not. We are all capable of that. So when you go to give somebody feedback that's not all 100% positive, they're likely to have a fixed mindset response. And so it's really, really important, I think, to put it on the process. So if you say, look, you're going to get there. And if you as a senior person, and look, for all of you, you've got a second year med student that you're sometimes working with, right? And you'll be an intern soon, you'll have medical students. So very early in your career, you have more junior people. So you need to start developing these skills so that you help more junior people grow. But sort of saying, hey, you're going to get there. Here's what I think your next step is, and here's when we can practice it again. And if you can authentically share a story, oh my God, the first time I did this, this is what happened, but here's how I got through it. That's really, really helpful. And people are going to learn really, really well there. In one of our videos, I have a wonderful doctor who actually eventually left medicine and went on to be the head of Uber Eats for Asia Pacific. She got her MBA at Melbourne Business School, and then so it was just really great. And she said, well, I'll come back to her in a minute, but I'll first say that she told the story in one of our clips for the book about how she sutured her glove to somebody's eyebrow.
Oh. I can totally see that happening.
That's fair enough.
I mean, I could imagine how it happened and then how she handled it and stuff. But it's wonderful because she's laughing about it and it wasn't, the patient was nice about it and stuff like that. But just thinking of her, I would mention that she gives a talk sometimes to med students about, I think she has 5 things that she learned in med school and as a junior doctor that help her really stand out in the corporate world. And boy, she had a meteoric rise, right? And I don't remember all 5 of them off the top of my head, but they were things like, when you work in a high stakes environment where mistakes can be life and death, there's no mistake in a business setting that bothers you that much, right? And so she's just less stressed out than her colleagues. When something bad happens, she's much more able to, in a relaxed way, think about what should I do next. She keeps her head about her. Also triage, she's learned how to prioritize things, and medicine taught her that. And I will be including that video in our book, because I get very concerned that there are medical students, it's not most of the medical students out there, but some in every class that are there because that's what their family wanted them to do. Or maybe what they wanted to do, but then when they get there and they start doing it, it's like, nah, this is not right for me, right? And I was in a PhD program to become a counseling psychologist and left after 2 years. I thought, I don't want to be a therapist. I want to do academic stuff and do that. And I thought, I was 25 then. And I thought, 2 years wasted in my life. Oh my God. And even if it had been 5 years, I would, oh my God. It's nothing. It's nothing. And there is nothing that you learn that goes to waste, right? So now I'm doing work with medical students. Those counseling psychology skills are helpful to me. The stuff I learned back in the 80s, it's helpful to me. All as an academic, you occasionally have a student who has some, a serious sort of psychological break right there in the building. So I've been the person who's gone and done sort of the initial triaging work with the person because I know a little bit more than everybody else, right? So, and now I'm a Red Cross volunteer. I do psychological first aid. The counseling stuff that I had all those years ago really helps. So the point is, no education or experience is lost or a waste of time. You have a long life ahead of you. You want to make sure you're doing what you want to do. And the reason why I really emphasize this is I worry that there's some med students and junior doctors who think this isn't for me, but there's no way out. And one of the things that I say sometimes when I'm speaking to groups is there is no career change or career setback that you could ever experience that would matter more to the people who love you than losing you would. Nothing. Stay. You gotta stay and be here because you have been learning skills that can allow you to lead all kinds of wonderful lives where you're able to help people in all kinds of different ways. There's never one path. And most medical students these days will do lots of different things in their career. I mean, they might not go from being a doctor to helping to run Uber Eats, but you might go into hospital administration, you might go into research. There's so many different paths that a career can take, where if there's some aspect of it that, you try it, it's uncomfortable, I would say keep trying, because we get over that uncomfort hump. I'm not saying give up the second something feels uncomfortable. No, keep trying. But, if you get through, with counseling psych, I did it for 2 years, and just it never felt like it fit for me. And when I left there and went to graduate school in social psychology, I walked in the building and I knew I was home. I knew what I had been missing. So don't be afraid to change course. I'm not saying all you guys should go leave and do something else. Most of you are going to be really happy being doctors. It's going to be a wonderful career and everything else. But just never feel like you're stuck. You always have options, and what you're learning and what allowed you to get into medical school and what you're learning in medical school is so valuable in so many different walks of life.
And it's literally just after you do, this is super funny. This is a joke that one of my consultants said. I thought it was, he's a fellow, his final year fellow.
Okay, close.
And, basically. And it was basically like, we were asking like, what are you going to do after like, you finish, you're like a fisher consultant, and it is like, retire.
yes.
But it kind of strikes right at the issue, which is a lot of people feel like the road is so long. You just do it, and at the very end, we forget that, we're going to be old. We'll be like 30, 40.
Oh my God.
But then you have to do the job.
Yes.
For the rest of,
yes.
I think the thing that a lot of people don't really kind of see when we're in medical school. But we're very, very lucky. We are so lucky because what we're studying right now is one of the few places where, like, for the most part, you're going to have a career as opposed to a job.
Yes.
You're going to have like a process.
There's a progression.
Where you go and like, this is something that you can really like have like a whole career. Whereas most other most other degrees, they're preparing for you for a job. And sometimes a lot of people feel like, I'm just doing this for the corporation, I'm doing this for the company. Whereas for us, we really have the opportunity to have a career.
You got meaning in your job every day. Every patient, there's meaning, and it's built in. And that's having meaning in what you do is a key part of well-being. So in medical school, when you started feeling like, well, why am I learning all this stuff for? Start thinking about what it's going to allow you to do so that you start with that meaning. But it's interesting what you said about a fellow who's about to become a consultant, because what I've seen is that another kind of tension point in medical careers is that shift. I mean, fellowship and getting through the exams and all that, that's quite hard. But then you get to a consultant, and sort of all along you've thought, once I become a consultant, I'll know everything, right? And I'll know everything, and you don't. And the senior consultants don't, and you don't know everything. And but people, there's much greater expectations on you, and you don't necessarily have anybody to run things by and stuff like that, and that sort of thing. And so that's another, when I talk about this Thriving in Medical School book, I've had so many junior, senior consultants say, write one for us too. And we are going to try and turn around and make an internship junior doctor version as soon as we finish the medical student version. But all through your career, there are these hurdles and these challenges. And we eventually realize we will never know it all. We will never be perfect. We will never do exactly the right thing every time. And I think the younger we realize that, the easier we can be on ourselves. Our responsibility is to try hard. Our responsibility is to do the best we can. And when we make a mistake, learn from it so it doesn't happen again. But our responsibility is also to get enough sleep and to have a life so that we're a happy doctor helping our patients, not an unhappy. I mean, who wants an unhappy doctor? And they're not going to do as well as the happy doctor. So, it's living a well-rounded life as well. I think that's part of our responsibility to ourselves, our family, and to our patients. And I promise you, when you get to the end of it, you'll be glad. You will never say, I wish I worked more, or I did 6 more surgeries, or I know for me, I got 1 more research paper. That's not what I'm worrying about now. No, it's the loving, fun times that you've had, and like you said, the privilege of being able to have a career where you can help people.
Do you have any final tips for medical students?
Yeah, look, I think generally, and I apply this to myself, I think we would all be a lot happier if we got over ourselves, right? I think we hold ourselves to impossible standards. And I think particularly high achieving people do that. We hold ourselves to really impossible standards. And so we spend a lot of time being unhappy with ourselves when actually we're friggin' amazing, right? But we don't let ourselves feel that as much as we feel the pain of not doing something perfectly. So I think we need to just cut ourselves some slack. And life is long, but you do only get one. So make sure you have enjoyment and love in your life as you go through it every day, every week.
Thank you so much, Professor Klein, for talking with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been such an interesting discussion, and I think it has really resonated with myself and Sean, but I can imagine with our audience as well. So thank you so much. And when can we expect for your book to come out?
Oh, gosh. We're between 2/3 and 3/4 done.
Woohoo!
Are we always?
I know. I'm hoping 2027.
Oh.
That sort of mid 2027. There's a lot of video editing still to do, and a few chapters still need to be written. But we're way more than halfway through, so we can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
So exciting.
And if they want to see more of you, where should they go?
Oh, that's a really good question. So if you go to Melbourne Business School, which is at University of Melbourne, but it's Melbourne Business School. That's the graduate business school at University of Melbourne. And put in Jill Klein, you'll see my site. And please reach out. The best email to reach me at, and you guys may be able to link this to something, but
It's in the description.
it's in the description. Okay, so I'll give the best email, the most direct email, because I would love to hear from you. And any thoughts about what we should definitely cover in the book, or anything I said today that was particularly helpful or unhelpful would be hugely helpful to know, because,
Positive and negative feedback.
yeah. Because I need to hone my message, and it won't be perfect, right? So, yeah. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.